live again. So, now, we're just going to pretend like you've seen nothing, because in truth, we don't know. So, welcome once again. Sorry about the streaming issues. It's probably one of you texting me about it right now, asking if we're going live. But I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you. Just looking forward to. Oh, he was seeing us, so never mind. Someone was seeing, so we'll just kind of start over if that's okay.
Not a whole lot we can do about that because we got stuck in the middle of a thought. So, God's been speaking to me about his timing.
Yes.
And hence the name of the live stream for tonight is God's Timing. And about a year or so ago, we were facing a lot of personal challenges with finances and with the legal system and just the enemy coming at us in many different directions. And as I was praying one day, I was lamenting to God and asking him, like, when is this situation going to end? When are things going to get better? The when kind of destination question. And as I was contemplating this, God spoke to me that his timing, he said, my timing is not punishment. And that kind of made me pause, like, all right, that is true, but he spoke that clearly to me in the sense that it is something that I needed to hear, and it was obviously something that I was believing about how God worked in my life. And so it caused me to do a lot of reflection about, how I feel about God and how I see him and what role does he play in my life. And Holy Spirit had helped me to discover that for a long time that I had lived in a mindset that God was punishing me for my past sins or mistakes when his timing seemed to be delayed. So, like, often a performance-based kind of mentality. That if there's, God would love me if I did this thing correctly, if I loved perfectly, or I made a great meal for my husband, or I didn't yell at my kids. Kind of, if I only did everything right, God would move. Now, many of you have heard me preach before. I've often told you that our checkbook has been my nemesis over the years because I have not done a very good job at keeping it balanced, putting the entries in. You name it, I've probably done it or not done it. And so there were times in our lives when we were struggling and praying for financial breakthrough and all these other kind of things. And even so, a year ago, again, those thoughts had come up and it had crossed my mind, well, if only I could do the checkbook right, then, financial breakthrough would happen and everything would be good. Needless to say that I was looking at God's movement in my life as a result of my works, not his sovereignty. I wasn't looking at my identity as a daughter, as an heir to the throne. My identity as his daughter wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for me to trust that my daddy God would move, that he would only move when I did the right thing. So I found that I was so focused on my performance and my expectation that I left no room for understanding that God will do what he wants to do when he wants to do it. Because he is God, he is my daddy, and I need to trust in that. So earlier this week, as we were kind of contemplating what we're going to talk about tonight, God brought this thought back to my head in him saying to me at that time, my timing is not punishment. And he added a little bit more to it for me even this week, because there have been different times over the last month that I've struggled with a variety of different things, as I'm sure all of you have. Excuse me. And so he spoke to me earlier this week that my timing isn't punishment, it is perfect. Now, often when I find myself struggling with things being delayed, or like I have an expectation and God hasn't met it, or I've prayed for something and I've endured and we've persevered and we've travailed and we've done all these things and whatever, and nothing happens or has happened, God often reminds me of the Lazarus story. And I know most of you are familiar with the story, and so I'm not going to read the entire thing. I'm just going to go through certain verses that God has highlighted for me. So this is in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. And I'm going to start off with verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who had poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." We'll go down a little further and pick up in verse 11. So, after he spoke this, Jesus went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." And then continuing on in the story, you can read all the rest of it in between. Go down to verse 38. So, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." That is such a powerful story. And I know, it's a story that all of us have heard. I'm assuming all of us have heard. But it just continually speaks to me about God's sovereignty and that He has a plan and a method and a way that is far beyond what we can even think. And we even this week have had some circumstances occur in our lives. A great testimony that I'm going to have Pastor Fred share.
Sorry.
That ended up being a situation that God was fighting on our behalf, and He was being glorified, and we didn't even know it. I mean, we've been praying about different things going on in our lives, but we didn't even know that God was gonna work in the way that He did.
I've been praying about, Lord, just different aspects of His timing. God had spoken and begun to develop this word in Michelle, and I was just asking Him for different examples of our own life. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like speaking of God's faithfulness. You can think of 100, if not 1,000 different instances, and yet for all that you can't think of one. So I've been asking Him over the last period of time just about examples to share about His timing. And one, as Michelle shared just a bit ago, it's unusual, and it's almost bittersweet. But so I've been praying for quite some time, for years actually, that God would free up my time so that I could spend more time at the church. It's just where my heart is. My heart is also in the clinic. I love doing what I do there. But to be able to split that time a little more evenly, or have more time to spend on you, that's my heart, and I believe God is going to fully open that up over time. And the bittersweet part is this. So with all this COVID stuff going on, it's not God, right? God did not bring this upon our nation, but yet He uses it. And in the process, I filed for unemployment last week, and just come to find out earlier this week that my company had, through the process of applying for loans, received one of the forgivable loans. So as it turns out, I have this week alone been able to spend most of my time still working on things for the church and such. And now, because of this, I'm receiving my full salary. Beginning next week, I'll be working probably about 70 to 75% of my normal hours, and so, but still be getting paid for, for spending time doing something else that I love, at least until things open up and the clinic grows and patients and so on and so forth. Again, it's bittersweet because nobody likes the circumstances, and yet I see God moving in the midst of it, and I would be remiss not to thank Him for that. Not for the whole situation, which everyone is processing and dealing with right now, but for working things for good in my life, in the same way that I know He's doing in yours, probably in ways that you haven't even yet begun to identify right now. Because I think so many of us, in some fashion, are kind of mourning um, everything that's going on, because it is just, it's left us, there's just such a lasting change and an impact that it's like losing a loved one in some ways. Uh, so,
So, one other cool thing about this testimony is that um, as all the shutdowns were starting to happen gradually over the last month, and we were making certain choices and decisions about what to do with Fred's work, um, he was just like, I'm going to make this decision. And I feel he felt Fred had the conviction at the beginning that Papa told him that he wasn't going to have to be on unemployment. And that is just so like God,
right.
because Fred, technically his last day was a week ago today,
Mm-hmm.
and he started the process on Friday, and I heard that so many people applied that the website crashed over the
Yep.
weekend. And so like the process began, but it never like went to fruition.
Right.
And so it was like, Fred was just getting emails today back from unemployment to make the connections that, he thought he would have to make a week or so ago. So, it's just so cool how God worked all that out. And it was kind of like, when Fred told me about, PT services and the, forgivable loan, and then he was going to go back to work, and I was like, well, that's a sweet Jesus moment.
Right.
That he is blessing us in this hour. And I mean, we've known from the beginning that he's always he would take care of us. And there's not that we like it that everybody is going through something similar, but there is some comfort in numbers.
Sure.
And that the enemy would like you to think that you're the only one going through this, when all of us know that we're not.
Right.
So, but it was just so cool, so neat how God just worked that out, and that wasn't something we labored over. No. It wasn't something we worried about. That was proof to me, that actual situation was proof to me, even confirming more of that God loves us. He loves you in these kind of cool situations where we didn't have to do anything but be his kids.
Right.
We didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to stand on my head. I didn't have to make sure our checkbook was in order, which, by the way, I'm doing a lot better with.
That is true.
Certain ducks didn't have to be in a row for God to move. He just did it.
Right. Right. So, I mean, there's one instance where, even as you said, his timing was simply in resting in him. He gave us peace from the outset, and it came about as a result of just trusting and resting in him. I got a second testimony. Are you good with that?
Sure.
May I share?
You have the floor or the computer screen. Go ahead.
I do. Although I'm wondering about the stream at the moment, but if nothing else, it'll be recorded and we'll post it later. So, such as is live stream and getting used to all of that. But the second testimony has to do with, sometimes the way God's timing comes about. Many of you know already, so I won't give you the full version, but before Joshua was born, Michelle had gone through, she was pregnant, we were pregnant, and it was a very rough pregnancy, and it was something that we knew something was wrong. Michelle was throwing up all the time, and she was on IVs, and um, it was one of those things that even right to the very end, before it was confirmed that there was a miscarriage, we knew something was wrong, and we were just storming heaven, um, for the life of our child. And it, of course, ended with the miscarriage. It was a really tough time. Um, it was something neither one of us had experienced, and in the sense that, we were battling with the life of our child, right? And it was like, God, where are you in this? Because in the end, they were lost. And it was tough. But I remember, I guess it was probably about a year and a half later, um, because I began thinking, well, maybe it's time, right? Maybe it's time that we talk about having another one. And unknown to me, she's having the same thoughts and can share maybe a little more.
I think you're confusing things.
Am I?
It was before Alyssa.
Oh. Okay, wrong child.
But it's a good testimony. Keep going.
Well, at any rate, I just remember the timing part, God giving me a dream independent of her, where he just spoke to us about having children, having more children. And it was just so cool that while we were both a little hesitant about that, he gave us peace. He met us individually, and then brought things back together in his time. He told us when it was time. He told us independently, and then he confirmed it. Sometimes we get worried about, is it time for this? Is it time for that? Lord, I've been waiting for this. Yes, there's times that you just know, and then there's times that he speaks through dreams. He speaks through visions. He speaks through prophetic words. His timing is always perfect. But we don't need to be in fear of missing it. He's gonna make it plain. He's gonna make it apparent. And I guess I relate it, again, even to times that people are going through right now. There's just so much uncertainty and probably a lot of prophetic dreams and hopes and desires. I know weddings that have been canceled and so on. And while God didn't cause all of this, his timing is still perfect. And he's going to work all things to good for us. And I believe he's going to make any questions that remain moving forward very apparent.
Amen. It's true. So the takeaways that I'm giving you for this short lesson is that, one, that Papa loves you, and there is nothing that you can do to change that. This is truth. Number two, God is sovereign. He is going to do what he wants to do, when he wants to do it, how he wants to do it. And you can have a conversation with him about, God, it would be nice that if it was now. Moses had conversations with God, changed his mind in certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
We can have those kind of conversations with God, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in the end, God is sovereign. It's his decision, and he's going to do it. And the third thing is that God, He's always going to be on your side. He is for you, whether you can see it or not. And, even in the Lazarus story, He was for Lazarus, He was for his sisters. But the greater thing at that particular time is that God was going to be glorified. And there was going to be a huge testimony. Yeah, it would have been great that Jesus came and healed Lazarus before he died. But let me just say that probably more people came to recognize the power of God in Jesus after the fact that he raised Lazarus from the dead. I mean, he had also raised other people from the dead before he did the Lazarus thing, but it's one thing to raise somebody from the dead, probably right after or shortly after it happens. I mean, like I know, but
Right.
for it to occur like 4 days later, I mean, that's a huge thing. I mean, I can't even just imagine. It is just
Right.
is huge.
Huge.
Huge. Anyway, so that is what I have for you today. So before we kind of sign off, we just want to take a little bit of time to pray for a couple things.
Are you sure that was Alyssa? I'd swear it was Joshua.
You were actually confusing both. You were like melding both stories together.
Wow. Okay. I like my version.